watching Inside Politics. Thanks for staying with us. Usual panelists with us, Dirty Say, Gloria Roba, Dismas Makua, Hezbonawila, and Mark Bichacha. Next topic. President Uhuru Kenyatta is expected to address the nation next week, Thursday. This was meant to happen in between April and June, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it had to be postponed. The president is expected to outline the government's progress in a number of projects. Key among them, the Big Four agenda. Is also expected to really root for the BBI agenda, which he did as well in the last State of the Nation address. So let's throw it back to our panelists on what really are the expectations for this year's State of the Nation address. Are they satisfied with how the president has handled himself, driven the country since the last State of the Nation address last year in March? And I think for this, perhaps we can start with you, Dismas. From last year's State of the Nation address, the president really broke down a number of the issues, from the Big Four agenda to the economy to the BBI and what they intend to do, of course, rooting for some of his key projects: healthcare, housing, food security, you name it. But then COVID-19 came and there was a lot of disruptions from perhaps some of the plans that were there. Looking at where we are now, how do you analyze our State of the Nation currently?
Well, you know, there's a genuine fear that the State of the Nation may end up being all sizzle and no steak if the president doesn't come up with a very solid report. He needs to have his report anchored on what he said last year, and then take us through the journey over the intervening period and tell us what he has achieved. Now, if he doesn't tell us what he intended to achieve last year and what he has achieved now, then it's going to be all sizzle and no steak. And he needs to tell us, because most of the things he intended to achieve, even without the benefit of any serious study, they've fallen flat on their face. Like, for instance, for the Big Four agenda, you never hear anybody in his administration talking about the Big Four agenda. When you talk about national security, that's when I think there's been a level of success. But more important, when you look at the pillars of the State of the Nation, it's supposed to address our socio-economic development and the cost of living. So that would be the bottom line. But the three key items that he must address at the State of the Nation for this year, so that we are able to make very good progress, is to revisit the issue of BBI and disabuse people of some notions they're holding about the report. You've seen Gloria and Jorotisha very vicious on some aspects of BBI. So he needs to shed more light and also open that window for any other divergent views to be addressed. Then secondly, he must talk about the issue of COVID and tell us what COVID really is and give us accurate numbers, and then give us mitigating measures on how we can manage COVID. But the most important thing would be how his administration is going to come up with a catalyst so that the economy starts growing again, so that everybody becomes happy, so that people stop committing suicide. You know, because of the poor economy, or the economy going south, I mean, people in distress. There's a lot of foreclosures. So that is what he must address. And I'm hoping he's going to respond to the issues raised by the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi on coming up with a socio-economic team to catalyze the economy, to look at the critical issues on what needs to be done as a matter of urgency so that we start growing. And you know, you can borrow a leaf from Germany, from Britain, and New Zealand. We need to get a team made of both public and the private sector operatives, people who can infuse new thinking into the administration. And it would be really a sad day for Kenya if the president appoints such a committee from members of his cabinet or people from the public sector and a few guys from maybe KEPSA. He needs to get really seasoned people who've got a bird's eye view of issues, so that we can make progress, we go to the next level. But if it just comes with you know, those boring public sector speeches telling us that, you know, the economy is doing very well, but there are no visible signs, then that will be a waste of time. And also, he now needs to put his public servants on some sort of performance contracts. Because the last person who had public servants in performance contracts is President Mwai Kibaki. The cabinet secretaries we have today, the principal secretaries we have today, right, most of these parastatal heads, they don't have a performance contracts. Okay. So we need to know every single public servant of rank has got a contract, performance contract, and when he fails, he's not moved around, he's given a sack.
Dismas, one would ask, because we live in a country where we set up committee after another to deal with whatever upcoming issues. So even when we're talking about, one on our socioeconomic welfare, one would ask, is that where our biggest problem is? Because it always boils down to implementation. Where are we falling short? Is it that we are short of policies and teams to work on this? Or it's a question of implementation and goodwill to do that? Quickly, in under seconds, I'd like to go to another panelist.
Yeah, Kenya forms committees for two levels. There's a committee formed to give Kenyans a painkiller when there's a big issue at a national level and there's a lot of fire, there's fury. You form a committee as a painkiller for Kenyans to be reassured that there is something going on. But the committee we are looking at right now is a committee to be formed by subject matter experts, especially from economics, who can assist us, grow the economy or catalyze the economy.
All right.
And that's why we've indicated times above number
that
this committee does not need persons from the government because that will be incest.
All right. Gloria, what is the one thing you really expect the president to address in line with the biggest problems that Kenyans are facing right now?
I think for me, economic recovery is a big thing. And it's not economic recovery short term, but I would like to see a resiliency plan for economic recovery for at least the next 2 years. And when we are speaking on this, I think it should be more targeted on the small traders, because really this is where we have the biggest problem. Some of the businesses that are running on a high level they can easily access funds, or they can access loans. But when you go down to the small traders who already shut down their shops back in February or in March, they're really struggling to get back and earn a living and try to just get out of this pandemic. That's one thing that I would really want for him to address. And then, of course, we have the education system, which has refused completely, under the watch on the supervision of CS Magoha. They have refused to understand that we are really in a new era, and they have to be innovative to be able to have business continuity within our schools. We've had our children stay home with us now. We are going to almost a year, and we are losing. And I've seen that finally an active citizen has gone to sue the government on this, because we are losing out. Our children need to go to school, or they need to access some form of learning. So I think those two issues, and I would like to reach out to the president, if he could just get rid of this cabinet secretary, Magoha, and give us someone who's willing to be open to change, who's willing to embrace the youth so that they can literally look out on what opportunities are there on life after COVID. That would be my biggest appeal to our president.
Economic recovery and a keen eye on the education sector. Husband, what does it for you? Looking at the last State of the Nation address, how we've driven the economy and other aspects of it all that are pillars of it, what should we really be keen on, given that we are still struggling with the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think the first key thing that I see is we need to move from the issue of economic and business resilience to the question of recovery. How do we move on? And I think it borrows a lot from what Dismas has said, that we need a very solid framework that will evaluate what has worked, what has not worked, and then what do we need as a pathway moving forward. If you look at the economic indicators in the second quarter of this year, I think there are serious pathways on what the country can do going forward. Our hotel and hospitality industry, for instance, was hit hard. I think we lost up to around 83% compared to where we were last year. But our food and agriculture sector kind of improved. And that tells you that there's a pathway there, that we can work hard in enhancing our food and agriculture sector and find ways of, reworking and recovering the hotel and institution and hospitality industry. So there are major pathways to learn from what has happened, which industries have been affected, and how then we create pathways moving forward. And then number two is the issue of how do we move forward with COVID as an endemic pandemic, that it's going to be here with us for some time. And I think the president needs to address himself to that. how do we move forward? How do we have the different sectors, key among them the education sector, as a going concern, and the mitigation measures to ensure that even with this endemic pandemic, we have our systems going on. And then thirdly, and I think the most important that people are looking forward to, is the legislative proposals in the BBI. How do we have a conversation around that is a lot more inclusive, because that will happen in Parliament.
Right.
And how does Parliament shape that conversation in a way that addresses itself to the 9 issues that they identified when they shook hands?
A legacy question it will be for the president. We're just under 2 years to the next election. He's served his 2 terms. In all the State of the Nation address, he's been really keen on addressing himself on issues on the Big Four agenda. And Mark, I'd really like you to speak on this. When we talk about the president's legacy and some of the projects he's keen on, and corruption and plunder in government that he addresses himself on as well in all the State of the Nation address, do we see progress or empty talk?
Well, let's look at the raw statistics. And as you know, I'm a proponent of looking at my country from the most positive perspective. So let's look at Uhuru Kenyatta's presidency in terms of the real GDP numbers. He inherited a $44 billion economy. He currently has driven it to $100 billion economy. That is a verifiable fact. So in terms of the economy, despite what people may say and feel, the numbers are looking good for him. Let's also look at his management of the economy during COVID. And this is when I would also like to remind my friends that, yes, there's an active committee within the Ministry of Trade and Industrialization that has actually been working on the policies and stepping in to actually handle a lot of issues that are affecting trade in this country. That said, the World Bank and IMF had expected that this particular economy in Kenya this year would shrink by around 2%, so a negative 2% growth. They have since revised that figure to a positive 3% growth. So in terms of GDP numbers, there is a net 3% GDP growth, with, of course, affected with some of the issues that even Hesbon has talked about. Our tourism and the hotel industry has suffered a lot. But by and large, Kenya has fared much better as compared to what was expected to happen. So on that front, the president has quite a good report to talk about. The second issue, of course, in the fight against corruption, there are 2 ways to look at it. Number one, look at the asset recovery angle of the fight against corruption. As a sitting president, there has never been a time in history where we've recovered more property and more money than we have during this period. Also, civil forfeiture laws have come into play during Uhuru's last year of leadership. So he has also a good report in that regard. And in the BBI, the items there being included in the fight against corruption can only serve to make that fight even more tighter and more effective. On the big agenda, I'm finishing. Give me 10 seconds. Okay. On the Big Four agenda, the one thing that he has to revive post-haste is the housing agenda, because we know it got stuck in court, but the expectation and the need of the people still exists.
All right, Dorotich, Mark Bichache there painting a very lovely, flowery report card for President Uhuru Kenyatta with under 2 years to the 2022 election. I don't know whether you share the same thoughts. What has this presidency been like, and what are your expectations for the State of the Nation address scheduled for Thursday?
Thanks, Kisa. I mean, I actually almost gave Mark Bichache a standing ovation. My brother, that was good what you did. But I want to look...
Honest. It's verifiable. Verifiable. It's verifiable. I swear on my heart.
Okay, may I continue?
Yes.
Thank you. Look, I want to look at the State of the Nation from the perspective of Wanjiku. Is she able to buy food, pay hospital bills, afford electricity, transport, that kerosene that you use to cook, For me to gauge the temperature, the state of the nation, you look at what is happening, not at elite political compact level or complicated, although factually true, figures and numbers around GDP and so on and so forth, but what is happening with the person on the ground on a daily basis. And there are three things that I would like the president to address himself to. Number one, the issue of energy. And you know I have been on this for a very, very long time. This is the driver of the economy. We are staring at a 20% hike on already highly exorbitant electricity prices. If you connect that with fuel, if you look at diesel, we are struggling. This economy cannot grow, cannot thrive, so long as energy cartels have a stranglehold on our supply, our demand, and payments. We are struggling. I would love to see the president address himself to this issue. The second issue, debt. This is an existential threat to our country. It is also a real and present danger. Taxpayers are funding corruption. We are suffering. We are dying under the heavy weight of our debt. And we don't even realize it, that even when the BBI talks about 35%, et cetera, this money is becoming scarce. It is not available. We are grinding ourselves to a halt. So I want to hear the president speak about our debt, our domestic debt, and tell us how he believes in his final months in office that he is going to address this matter. And finally, I really want him to address himself specifically now to the issue of the war on corruption. He has spoken about it at length. Look, we're in the middle of a COVID crisis where people's health have been sacrificed on the altar of nationwide political rallies. Hospitals are full, people are dying, families have lost their jobs. We are in deep trouble. And yet, the one place where the president could have taken executive action and said, we are bringing this to an end right now, KEMSA. What happened with the COVID billionaires? What happened with the managed equipment service? These things we hear about, we discuss them on these shows, we are annoyed and we are furious, and next week we've forgotten. The president has to address himself to the issue of this war on corruption that he has been talking about since 2013, and we want to know how he intends to finish this before the end of his term, because these issues all bleed into one. And when we move away from haute politique, right, from a compact,
Gerald, and still on you, really, as you rightly put it, in every State of the Nation address since 2013, the president has talked about the war on corruption, what he intends to do. What different thing do we expect him to say this year? Because is there fatigue around that conversation of we will do this, we will do that? Are we seeing any tangible results from where you sit?
You see, from where I sit, and if I were to even empathize for a minute with His Excellency the President, the architecture of corruption is so deeply ingrained into the systems of this country that it is not a question of waving a magic wand and tomorrow corruption is over. But I've always stated and underscored that it is a question of identifying. For example, the Senate finally did not accept the MES report. If they do not, so it's a legislative issue, but it's also a question of the executive and how the president begins to unravel, how he empowers, how the institutions that are meant to investigate are able to vigorously get to the bottom. And beyond that, there should be prosecutions, arrests and prosecutions. And beyond that, there should be restitution or incarceration. Right. So what I have not seen the president do is follow along the continuum from beginning to the end. Who has ended up in jail? Who has ended up returning any money that has been stolen to the coffers of the government? Instead, we, the taxpayers, continue to fund corruption in this country. So he has not completed the continuum. He stops at the big statements, but does not complete the process.
So lack of continuity on that end. All right. Gloria had something to say on the Big Four agenda.
Okay, I wanted to comment that on the Big Four agenda, I heard Mark Bichache talking and really assuming the role of the government spokesperson. And yes, the issues that he has brought about and he has talked about might be factual, but I want to speak particularly on you have to read the Big Four agenda with the topics and everything, and even their key performing indicators. When you go to food security, they were talking that by 2019, they must have placed 700,000 acres through private public partnerships into large-scale farming so that we might be able to have that food production. They have some key performing indicators, which actually they have not met. So when you come to give back a report to the people who voted you in, and you want to show them that indeed you're pushing for a legacy that is substantial, that is impactful to the people, please just be honest. Be honest with us, because we have read that Big Four agenda. We have read the good things that it's supposed to achieve, and we are waiting to see affordable healthcare, for instance, which is not rocket science. It's really about partnering with these providers of this kind of insurance, where you can reach the low income and underserving regions. So some of these things, when I hear Mark Bichache talking, I get really frustrated, because I keep saying...
Gloria, just about... Gloria, let me just speak on this. Just about a week ago, the president launched that campaign to have low-income earners, very vulnerable and the poor, into the NHIF, say about a million of them. Is this progress for you from where you sit?
For me, the issue is not even that NHIF thing, because let me explain it. NHIF, for instance, you can only access it in certain hospitals. When you go to underserved regions, where their first point of contact with the healthcare is a clinic, is a dispensary, that's where they go to seek their healthcare. Now, when you give someone NHIF and say, okay, we are going to give you free NHIF, but they can't even access that facility that you're sending them to, whether it's a level 4 or a level 5, then are you really giving affordable and accessible healthcare? So I keep saying that we are completely disconnected from the underserved communities. When you go to the slums, they will tell you how to NHIF. Mimi, I cannot afford at night when I'm sick, or even during the day, to get my...
All right, so it's a question of access. It's a question of access to healthcare. Dismas wanted to...
You need to look at it holistically.
Okay, Dismas wanted to pronounce himself on the state of the economy. Let me give you a few minutes to do that.
You know, it's interesting when the Jubilee administration says that President Kenyatta's management of COVID has been a huge success, and they're all over town giving themselves a pat on the back. So the question therefore begs, when you say that you have been a success, what are these key performance indicators or parameters that you set us to achieve, and you've achieved them, and you are happy? And we're supposed to be doing this marking. Is it the fellows within the Jubilee administration, or it's Amura and Wanjiro who are the beneficiaries of these interventions, who are supposed to form a view? And what Mark Bichache has indicated here reminds me of what my professor of economics told me at Strathmore University, that you can torture statistics to give you any kind of answer. And that's what he's managed to do, is tortured statistics to the extent that somebody who is watching this show from America celebrating Joe Biden's win thinks Kenya is a miracle country, everybody's happy. What the Jubilee administration mandarins need to do is just to go to Kibera and see the way people are languishing in poverty, or go to, parts of Kenya and speak to people who have lost their jobs, who do not know how they're going to place bread on the table this evening, people who are facing foreclosure, people that are embarrassed to meet their spouses or children, but they have to leave the house every day in the morning hoping for a miracle, so that at the end of the day they go back with bread in the evening. So this idea of trying to give us figures, torturing statistics, to paint a very rosy figure that the management of COVID has been a huge success, and the only beneficiaries are the very public servants who've been getting a continuous salary.
We're out of time. We're out of time, but I think you've made your point. I think you've made your point really out of time. Big figures that do not translate to what the common mwananchi feels. There's no money in their pockets. The situation is not getting better. So where do we go next? I want us to take a very quick break here on the Inside Politics. When we get back, the country has waited with bated breath for about 5 days for one of the hotly contested elections in U.S. history. Joe Biden, former vice president, took it. But what does a change of guard mean for you and I? We'll be dissecting these issues for you when we get back from the break. Stay with us.